We're joined now by Stacey Dean, who's Deputy Undersecretary for Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services at USDA. And we're really grateful, Stacey, to have you here with us. The administration's perspective, USDA's perspective, you're such a critical player on this issue of hunger in general in the United States, food and ag, but certainly when it comes to children and schools. And that has been a lot of the focus of our conversation today. So welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you.
No, it's great, and we congratulate Secretary Vilsack on his nomination. So we look forward to his leadership, and today, as I mentioned, your perspective. So we just had a panel discussion, really meaningful discussion on the intersection of race and poverty and hunger in America. And while these issues, you've spent a career working on these issues, they've been prevalent, and we've made progress over the years. But, I think for a lot of us, a lot of Americans, the pandemic was a prism for really seeing these issues in a new light and really raising awareness on the critical needs, especially in our Black and Brown communities across the country, disproportionately hit, I think, by COVID, and as well as food insecurity. But, there's been a number of things that have occurred to provide some hope over the months of this pandemic. And the Biden administration, even in its initial month, has talked a lot about putting these needs on the front burner. Can you share a little bit about the Biden administration's perspective, USDA's point of view on how we can help?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me. As you said, the impacts of the pandemic and the economic fallout have been widespread. Felt by millions of Americans, but have been particularly prevalent amongst Black, Latino, Indigenous, and immigrant households. And these disproportionate impacts reflect harsh, longstanding inequities, often stemming from structural racism in education, employment, housing, healthcare, and the current crisis is exacerbating those issues. So what do we do about it, right? What do we do about both this urgent problem, but the fact that it stems from longstanding inequities? So I think first, we need to talk about it, and that's why I'm glad you asked me about it. I think naming a problem, talking about it, coming to a shared understanding of how we got here is critical to tackling it. So I really don't take for granted that the president and the administration are talking about the existence of historical, structural, and institutional racism and advancing racial justice as a key component of economic recovery. And second, I think, then of course we have to meet critical urgent needs now. So we have to increase food assistance to deal with this urgent problem, which we at USDA are doing. And we're really looking forward to Congress passing the American Rescue Plan, which will put more tools at our disposal to help families. But food assistance isn't going to do it alone. Hunger is really a downstream problem that is caused by things that happen before families find themselves in the crisis that leads to hunger. And that's why the president's also calling for stronger unemployment insurance, eviction moratoriums and rental assistance, expanded health coverage, cash assistance, and other supports that will prevent families from falling into hunger. And of course, finally, as we look ahead to forging a recovery, it has to work for everyone. And so we're going to try and do it all, and we have to do it all.
We do. We over the last few months, we've been advocating for the SNAP increase that we've seen, and the extension of pandemic EBTs, and we appreciate that. I think government has even shown some innovation and flexibility in extending some programs, and again, kind of creating some flexibility in a really unusual circumstance. But you're right, we need to do more, and we're so glad to hear that these issues are front and center. Another one that is really on everyone's mind. You shared it's on your mind as a parent, it's on mine as a parent. There's a lot of talk about schools reopening, and that is a good thing. That's where kids need to be. And there are a lot of steps that we'll put into place as a country to ensure the safe reopening of schools. But we're also mindful of you mentioned the economic downturn, some of the consequences of the pandemic, and it has just increased the struggle for many families, many children, whether it's unemployment or another situation. We know that pre-pandemic, school meals play an incredible role in providing nutrition for children. And we also know that even before the pandemic, the statistics were too high, unacceptable in our country to have so many hungry children. But as the pandemic has really kind of just kept on month after month, thinking about the extra struggles that many families are feeling because of it, what is your view on getting kids back into school, feeding them? Is there more we should and can be doing when all of our kids get back into school, especially those who have found it even harder during the pandemic, and to make ends meet and put food on the table? What's your view?
Well, so first, I think it's important to just acknowledge the extraordinary work that schools, community organizations, individuals across the country, the role that they've all played to sort of to respond to the needs of kids. USDA did offer lots of robust waivers to change some of the rules in order so that school meals and summer feeding could adapt to the circumstances of COVID. But we didn't do this alone in terms of making sure that food got to the kids who needed it. So I do want to say thank you, and I'm sure many of the folks who led the way are attending your convening. But as I look ahead, let me just say that, and then, but those waivers and the way that schools and organizations figured out how to help was sort of like on your heels, right? The problem just kept coming and it was unfolding, and we weren't always clear what was next, or a month ahead, right, or 2 months ahead. Now I think we're in a moment where we can't predict the future for sure. I think we want to, certainly as a parent, I want to know that school will reopen successfully very soon. But we are in a little bit more of a place to look ahead and think about, all right, as we set up the framework for summer and the fall, what are we looking for? So obviously, we have to run the programs according to how we were authorized to do, but we do have a lot of flexibility. In my view, the questions that I'm asking my team are, what are we going to do to fully support school reopening? So, we don't want to be the reason a school can't reopen, for sure. What's safe from a public health standpoint? So, for example, it's probably unlikely that the meal can be served in a cafeteria with large numbers of kids. We don't want kids congregating around checkout. So those are things we learned this year that are clearly going to be true. How do we support schools to run a program that's really designed to be extremely predictable, right? That the whole school meals program is very structured in an unpredictable environment. I think that's both financial issues, that's school closure and open issues. One, we were planning for serving in the facility, and now we're flipping to grab and go. And how do we aim for good, nutritious food, where I think we had to offer a lot of flexibility in the past year. And I'd like to see if as we return to school, we can aim higher. So that's really what's top of mind for us. And of course, what underlays all of this, and it was sort of implied in your question, is we have a lot more children whose families lost income. They're struggling. And we've got to be sure that we are resilient and responsive to them, both through school meals, through a stronger and more robust SNAP program, as the president has asked for, and all of our wraparound programs that we run. So we're thinking on all of those dimensions.
It's interesting because we, and just listening to a lot of the conversation today and in recent days, there are so many things that I think for most people are top of mind when we think about reopening schools. Masks and ventilation and proper transportation, social distancing, health checks, all of those things, which are so now, even my 7-year-old is very conscious of all of this. And sometimes you're amazed because I'm still not used to the masking, but he is, but one thing that doesn't come along in that sentence of all the things that we're going to do is do more to feed more kids. I know a lot of people are thinking about it. And we've had some conversation today. A lot of people also think it's the right time to talk about universal feeding. We've done so much through the pandemic to make food accessible, and I think you said, kind of dealing. You want to be predictable, but you can't be. And the pandemic has proven that, right? That agility serves us all. And there were a lot of efforts to do incredible things to feed those kids who are relying on school meals when school was closed, right? So we've done a lot. Is it the right time to have a conversation about universal free meals in schools?
Well, yes. I mean, I don't know that there's a wrong time, but it is, right? We are, I don't know if we're in the eye of the hurricane or what the right broad metaphor is, but we are facing so many crises of just a very serious nature. And we're also bringing in at the senior levels of government, the president himself, a recognition of our history and how it's withheld opportunity for so many, right? It is a kind of an overwhelming time, and yet it's very clarifying. It's very clarifying to help us figure out what we have to do. So we do have to seize the moment, ask big questions about what we want for our country. And as you point out, what have we learned in the past year with all of this flexibility and trial and error of any number of things? So we are operating basically a universal free school meal system right now. I'm not sure how many people have taken stock of all of the particulars of that because they've been just trying to make sure that they're feeding kids. Right. So, look, I can't make universal free school meal policy right now. So I wanted just everyone to understand that that's going to be a conversation where decisions are made over my head. But I think it's really, I hope that Secretary-elect Vilsack and Cardona talk about it, right? One is, what are the costs? What are the alternatives in terms of tackling key important issues where we might otherwise deploy the money? And I do think an important element of this conversation is how education, the education policy perspective on what a universal approach would offer to the public school system. Right. So all of that has to sort of be considered, and quickly. We have budgets to propose and hopefully a child nutrition reauthorization conversation that we're going to be engaged in. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that, but it's always the right time to have a conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. And Stacey, I would say, it is both a child nutrition reauthorization as well as the concept of universal feeding, two really important things for us. We'd love to be a thought partner and we'd love to help. Through this summit and through future steps, we're going to try to keep that conversation happening because we just think it's an important one. And I think you're right. A lot of learnings. Thinking about where do we want our country to go? Our goal today is, let's find a solution. We think it is doable. We think we can end child hunger in America. And we know it's not only government alone who has to do that. We all have a role to play in fighting this battle. So want to stick with schools for a moment. Before the pandemic, we've been doing some work with Feeding America and FRAC on an issue that became really important to us because we learned how prevalent it was, and it's the meal debt issue in schools. And we learned of it because of a child in Warwick, Rhode Island, couldn't pay for his or her lunch and was given an inferior meal. That was the policy of, the school board or whatever in that jurisdiction. And we started looking into this issue and just saw that meal debt and making kids, othering kids, shaming kids if they aren't able to pay or if they have meal debt was a fairly common practice across the country. So we did some work trying to lay the groundwork to stop that as a practice. We know that there are many in the school setting, including school nutrition directors and those working in cafeterias who all they want to do is feed kids, but sometimes they're prevented because of certain policies in place. We would love USDA's help to see if we could come up with a national policy to put that practice to an end, especially as we think about what may happen in just a few months when schools reopen and kids are still struggling, but we've got to feed them.
So this is an area where I'm still learning both the details of the policy, but it's also an area where I'm learning the balance of deep breathing to calm down and to sort of realize that I'm not vested with all of the power that when I hear about certain issues, I would like to be. So right now, local communities are determining how to manage the problem. And as you point out, that is having some pretty uneven results. We require school food authorities to develop and communicate a policy for handling the charges, but we do allow them to define how that would work. So as we look beyond COVID, this is certainly one of the areas that I'd like to look into. So I'd welcome your inputs and thoughts on that. I don't think any child should ever be stigmatized that way, certainly not by an organization who we've entrusted them to care for and educate and be a model for them. So I look forward to further conversation on this topic.
Well, no, we appreciate that as well, and certainly would love to share thoughts. And I think we feel it's un-American, and I think as we think about everything that's important in a school setting, school is tough enough these days for kids, and we ought to be nurturing them, we ought to be feeding them, and I think that's abundantly clear that many want to do that, but there are just certain policies in place. And I think as we think about child nutrition reauthorization and maybe increasing access to some of the programs that exist, or, making that big idealistic jump to universal feeding, we go a long way to solving the school lunch shaming and meal debt issue, that's for sure. So we appreciate you taking it under consideration, and we'd love to work with you on it. I think we're almost through, but I want to take advantage of not just your USDA hat, but your many years and passion for working on the issues that we're talking about today. Want to close, Stacy, if you could talk a little bit about why ending child hunger is important to you, and perhaps some words of wisdom or something to help those who are watching us, something to inspire them to take charge and do something maybe in their own community. Because as I mentioned before, this is something that we think we all have a part, whether you're a business, whether you're a community, whether you're the government, whether you're a service organization, whether you're an individual who's just concerned about this. Every little step forward helps us make progress. So just a personal reflection, and then maybe some thoughts on how people can get involved.
Sure. Thank you. I was really proud to join the Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Service. I mean, their mission is to feed people who need help need help putting food on the table, one day, every day. And that's incredibly inspirational. And that's work that I've done my entire career. But just having that be the core mission of the organization is inspiring. And the reality is that all of the people there just have that singular focus. It is something that bonds us together. In my short time, I've noticed it. And it there's an incredible clarity about what's right about that, particularly with respect to child hunger. And so, sometimes I have to admit, I don't always reflect on the why of it. It just feels like the right thing to do. It feels like we can do it. And it is something that really fires me up when I know that it's not happening. And it is incredibly satisfying when I know we make forward progress. So I guess I've just been doing it so long that it's a part of who I am. But in terms of, I guess, first of all, I draw incredible inspiration from the kinds of groups who are, attending your meetings. So it's funny to think about me offering some thoughts to them. Well, in this new role, government I'm experiencing the idea of being in a place where there's an incredible power in pushing out these really powerful, strong federal nutrition programs. I mean, what an incredible job they do in terms of lifting millions of people out of poverty, improving food insecurity, putting just food in a child's belly, right? And they do it on this mass, incredible scale. But that's sort of how we see it from where we sit, is this big solution. But of course, there are cracks and fissures on the individual and on the community side, things where it's not working perfectly, things where the one size fits all is too inflexible, or where the inability to pivot is a problem. I mean, PEBT is a really good example. I assume the folks who came know what PEBT is, but the idea of launching the Child Nutrition Replacement Program in the amount of time, like only government could put out $11 billion over the short span of a few months directly into the hands of parents to help them feed their kids, right? That was power. But yet, without the help of advocates and individuals and foundations to broadcast the program, do outreach, talk to the press, translate materials, reassure immigrant communities that this would not count for public charge, like that kind of collaboration is what made that effort such a success. And so I would say there's going to be more of that in the coming year as we continue to deploy new approaches where we need your help getting the assistance that we're offering to the people who need it. And I invite you, tell us what isn't working and tell us how you can step in and get our help to families who need it, because it's only through this kind of collaboration that it all works. And I'm deeply appreciative.
Well, thank you, Stacey. We're firm believers in the power and success of public-private partnerships, and so count us in. We want to be a partner in thinking about how to address these issues, however we can. It's so important that we do the right thing, and we wish you all the luck. And success, and like I said, count us in. We'll be there to help. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
I appreciate it.